Imagine this. You're alone in a room that once belonged to someone who is now gone. The air is heavy, the furniture unchanged, photographs still cling to the walls like faint echoes. There's no chaos, no violence, no visible wound. And yet, there's a strange grief that lingers, not just for the person who left, but for something far less nameable. The silence in the room feels less like peace and more like a question that never got answered. What do we mourn, really, when we look at a life that felt unfulfilled? The world rarely teaches us how to ask that. It teaches us to produce, to consume, to achieve, to win. And yet, beneath it all, there is a quiet, gnawing sensation that something is missing, something essential, invisible, unquantifiable. A hunger not of the stomach or even of the heart, but of the soul. Call it meaning. This hunger has no easy language. It doesn't always scream. Often, it shows up in subtler forms, the restless nights, the sense that no accomplishment ever quite satisfies, the way joy feels like a performance rather than a state of being. Carl Jung called this condition the spiritual problem of the modern individual, a sickness of the soul which cannot be cured by rational means. We live longer, have access to boundless information, and surround ourselves with tools meant to connect us, and yet, paradoxically, many feel more adrift than ever. The hunger for meaning is not new. It is as ancient as consciousness itself. But in our age, it is perhaps more confused. Where earlier centuries looked toward religion, myth, or nature for orientation, today we stand in an era of infinite options and minimal guidance. The gods have been replaced by algorithms, rituals by routines, pilgrimage by performance. And yet the hunger remains. In our quieter moments, often when we least expect it, we catch glimpses of this void. A child asks, "Why are we here?" and we realize we've lost the vocabulary to answer honestly. We read headlines of people who had everything but still chose to disappear. We chase happiness but rarely ask, why does happiness matter if it's untethered from meaning? Arthur Schopenhauer, with his bleak but honest insight, once wrote, "Life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom." And perhaps this pendulum exists because we have severed our lives from purpose. Without meaning, pleasure becomes anesthesia. Pain becomes punishment. Time becomes weight. We sense this absence in the cracks between our daily distractions. The existential fatigue that sets in on Sunday evenings. The cold dread when a conversation turns too quiet. The persistent question, is this all there is? The trouble is that our society is not designed to answer that question, it's designed to mute it. We are told to be positive, productive, passionate, but not profound, not troubled, not lost. As if the very struggle for meaning is a kind of failure. But what if it isn't failure at all? What if this hunger, this aching absence, isn't a problem to be solved but a signal to be heeded? Viktor Frankl, a man who found meaning even in the unspeakable horror of Auschwitz, argued that life is never made unbearable by circumstances but only by lack of meaning and purpose. His words do not promise ease, but they do offer orientation. The soul doesn't hunger for pleasure, it hungers for why. And when that why is missing, the soul doesn't scream. It withers. So here we are, modern individuals suspended in time, technologically advanced but spiritually malnourished. We are no longer starving for bread but for something deeper, the sense that our suffering matters, that our choices echo beyond the immediate, that we are seen by something greater than productivity metrics and social validation. We don't just want to live. We want to matter. And so, the hunger persists. It hides behind ambition. It disguises itself in addiction. It bleeds out in the quiet tragedies of wasted potential. It manifests in depression not always as sadness, but as the unshakable sense of being lost in plain sight. But to be hungry is not the same as being empty. Hunger is a signal of life. And this ache is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of an inner revolution. For meaning, unlike happiness, is not found. It is forged. Meaning is not a luxury of poets or philosophers, it is a fundamental human necessity, as vital as oxygen and just as invisible. And like oxygen, its absence may not be noticed at first. But slowly, cell by cell, the soul suffocates. What gives meaning its power is not simply its presence, but its structure. Just as a house must be built on a foundation, the experience of a meaningful life depends on deep psychological architecture rooted in purpose, coherence, and significance. Purpose gives us direction. Coherence offers understanding. Significance affirms that our lives matter. Remove any of these pillars and the entire inner edifice begins to collapse. Let's begin with purpose, that deeply rooted sense that our actions point towards something beyond themselves. It is what allows a parent to rise at 3 a.m. for a crying infant or a painter to wrestle with a blank canvas for days without recognition. Purpose is not always grand or visible, it is often quietly persistent. It is the why that Viktor Frankl wrote about, the force that gives us the strength to endure almost anyhow. But purpose alone is not enough. Without coherence, we become strangers to our own lives. Coherence is the need for life to make sense, to feel that the events, choices, and suffering we endure can be woven into a narrative that holds together. We are, by nature, storytelling creatures. The psyche organizes reality not through data, but through meaning-laden stories. When trauma or chaos shatters those stories, we don't just feel pain, we feel madness. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Everything has been figured out except how to live." He was naming that modern condition in which coherence is lost. We know how to calculate and categorize, how to optimize and simulate, but we have forgotten how to integrate experience into a story that nourishes the soul. Then there is significance, perhaps the most elusive and the most essential. Significance is the sense that we are seen, not just socially, but cosmically. That our lives matter even when we are not successful. That we matter even in suffering. Without it, people can live among thousands and still feel invisible. In a world saturated with comparison, significance has become dangerously outsourced. We look for it in followers, in status, in curated images of perfection. But true significance is internal. It is the whisper that says you belong to something deeper. Aldous Huxley once wrote, "The man who comes back through the door in the wall will never be quite the same as the man who went out." This door, metaphorical yet necessary, is the journey inward toward meaning that arises not from the world's validation, but from the soul's reckoning with itself. We cannot download meaning. We must build it. And that construction begins in the darkest places, not in clarity, but confusion. Think of the times you have grown the most. Were they not born from suffering, ambiguity, heartbreak? We do not develop our architecture of meaning through ease, but through confrontation with death, with despair, with questions that tremble beneath our daily roles. The person who has stared into the abyss and still chooses to build, that person is forging meaning. But herein lies the danger of modern life. The machinery of comfort shields us from the abyss. Entertainment is always on. Distraction is always available. We are offered relief, not revelation. And so the questions that build meaning: who am I? Why am I here? What do I serve or remain unanswered, buried beneath dopamine and noise? Schopenhauer, ever the pessimist, warned us of this shallow avoidance. A man can do what he wants, he wrote, but not want what he wants. Meaning arises not from indulging every impulse, but from questioning them. From understanding that not all desires are created equal and that the soul, unlike the ego, is nourished by depth, not novelty. The tragedy of our time is not that people are evil. It is that they are empty. And emptiness, when masked by busyness, becomes a slow spiritual death. But here is the miracle: we are still capable of building. We can still forge lives of purpose, coherence, and significance. But we must choose to begin that work from within. The soul's architecture is not built with blueprints or formulas. It is built with courage, the courage to descend into our confusion and confront the raw, unmet hunger that lives there. And once we see that hunger for what it is, not a flaw, but a calling, we begin to reorient our lives not around comfort, but around meaning. The soul was never designed to live inside a machine. And yet, that's where we find ourselves. Not chained, perhaps, but entangled. Our days are structured by algorithms, our desires manipulated by marketing, and our identities scattered across digital reflections. This is not science fiction, it is the quiet tragedy of modern life. We are more connected than ever before, yet more fractured in spirit. And so, the question must be asked: what if the world we've built is starving the very part of us that longs for meaning? Meaninglessness is not a passive void, it is an active force. It creeps in through the mechanisms of speed, distraction, and commodification. It dulls the sacred. It mocks depth. It turns time into currency and identity into branding. In a world obsessed with efficiency, we've come to fear stillness. But it is in stillness, solitude, reflection, silence that meaning is born. When every moment is filled, when every silence is replaced by scrolling, the soul is never allowed to speak. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." But what happens when the why is buried beneath 1,000 hollow hows? When the rituals of deep living are replaced with productivity hacks? When suffering is viewed not as a crucible for transformation, but as a malfunction to be medicated or ignored? We've designed a world where pleasure is abundant, but meaning is scarce. We've mistaken stimulation for connection, attention for love, visibility for significance. The systems we inhabit, economic, digital, social, reward immediacy, not introspection. They value image over essence. Consider the workplace. In many professions, humans are treated as tools to generate output, rather than beings with souls capable of purpose. Do what you love has become less an invitation to meaning and more a weaponized slogan used to justify burnout. Purpose is repackaged as productivity. Or consider social media a hall of mirrors in which the self is constantly reflected but rarely known. We curate our lives not to be understood, but to be liked. But when life becomes performance, we lose access to authenticity, and meaning cannot survive in a lie. This machinery of meaninglessness does not operate with malice. It operates with momentum. It does not have to convince you to give up your soul, it only needs to keep you busy enough that you forget you have one. And yet, amid this machinery, we catch glimpses of a deeper ache. The moment after the applause fades, the strange emptiness after a goal is reached, the feeling that even our triumphs seem to ring hollow. These are not failures. They are signals. The hunger for meaning does not vanish. It mutates. In the absence of the sacred, we build idols. In the absence of spiritual depth, we elevate celebrities, brands, ideologies. We crave something larger than ourselves, and if we cannot find it, we invent shadows of it. Jean Baudrillard called this a state of hyperreality, where representations of meaning replace meaning itself. 1,000 motivational videos, self-help mantras, or pseudo-spiritual influencers simulate depth, but offer little transformation. They may spark momentary inspiration, but they rarely demand the slow, painful labor of inner change. But perhaps the most sinister force in the machinery of meaninglessness is its quiet insistence that your hunger is a personal problem, rather than a systemic signal. You are told to fix your mindset, practice gratitude, stay positive, all while the world strips you of ritual, community, myth, and purpose. You are expected to feel whole in a culture built to fragment you. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World warned of a society where people would be so entertained, they'd stop caring about their freedom. But it's not just freedom we risk losing, it's depth, direction, dignity. This is not a call to abandon the world, but to see it clearly. The machinery of modern life will not feed your soul. That is not its purpose. That is yours. And so we must ask, if meaning cannot be found in the world as it is, where then can it be built? Can the soul, battered by speed and simulation, still find a center? The answer lies not in rebellion alone, but in reclamation of rituals, of values, of inner space. Meaning is not handed down. It is carved out, often in the dark, often through pain. Those who have walked before us, the philosophers, mystics, artists, and seekers, were not immune to despair. They were often its most intimate companions. But rather than retreating into numbness or noise, they descended into the abyss and brought back the fire. In their lives, we do not find formulas. We find maps, not answers, but courageous directions. Take Viktor Frankl, whose search for meaning wasn't born in a lecture hall, but in the death camps of Auschwitz, in a world where everything was stripped away. Dignity, family, future. He discovered that even when a man is robbed of everything, he still retains the freedom to choose his attitude, to decide what suffering means. That realization didn't make his agony disappear. It gave it form. When we are no longer able to change a situation, he wrote, we are challenged to change ourselves. His suffering was not redeemed by a miracle, it was redeemed by meaning. Or consider Nietzsche, often misread as a nihilist, yet obsessed with overcoming despair through the creation of values. To live is to suffer, he said. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering. Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch, the Overman, was not a glorification of strength, but of creative self-authorship. In a world emptied of divine command, meaning would no longer be given. It would have to be forged, through art, through struggle, through the courage to stare into the void and will purpose into being. The abyss does not offer comfort. It demands transformation. Carl Jung called this descent into the unconscious the process of individuation, a necessary confrontation with the shadow, the unacknowledged parts of ourselves. In the depths, he believed, we do not find annihilation but integration. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, he wrote, but by making the darkness conscious. Meaning emerges not from bypassing suffering, but from metabolizing it. Each of these thinkers recognized a brutal truth. The soul cannot be saved by comfort. It must be initiated. It must be burned clean of illusion. And yet, even in the fire, there is direction. The mystics knew this too. In the writings of St. John of the Cross, the dark night of the soul is not a curse, but a sacred stage in the soul's journey. When all familiar consolations fall away, we are left not in abandonment, but in preparation for a deeper union with the divine, or with the real. This is not about religion in the dogmatic sense. It is about sacredness. The recognition that meaning does not lie in external circumstances, but in one's relationship to existence itself. Even the artist becomes a mystic in this sense. Rainer Maria Rilke, writing in Solitude and Silence, dared to say, "Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final." The artist, like the philosopher, does not avoid pain, they shape it. So what do these pathfinders teach us? First, meaning is not found in the light, but in how we navigate the dark. Second, despair is not a dead end, but a doorway. Third, the modern world, with all its speed and spectacle, cannot offer the kind of meaning that requires suffering, solitude, and depth. These must be chosen, or at the very least, not fled from. And finally, we are not alone. Others have walked these paths. And though each person's journey is unique, the human soul speaks a common language, one of longing, breaking, rebuilding. In a world that teaches us to fear pain, to medicate discomfort, and to escape difficulty, these voices remind us that some truths are only accessible through endurance. Some kinds of clarity are born only after chaos. And some kinds of meaning are more real for having been bled for. But there is more to the story. For even if meaning can be forged in the fire, can it last? Can it remain steady in the everyday when there is no crisis to awaken us? Must we always suffer to remember who we are? The crisis may awaken us, but it is the ordinary that sustains us. The birth of meaning often comes through pain, yes, but if it lives only in pain, it will flicker and fade. The deeper task is this, to weave meaning into the fabric of daily life, to sustain the flame long after the firestorm has passed. But how? It begins with ritual. Not necessarily religious ritual, though those, too, can offer profound anchoring, but personal, intentional, lived ritual. The kind that grounds the soul in time, that tells the psyche, you are not floating. You are part of a rhythm, a cycle, a deeper continuity. Our ancestors knew this intuitively. They marked life with rites of passage, seasonal ceremonies, shared meals, mourning practices. They understood that meaning is not just an idea, it must be enacted. It must be embodied. In modern life, however, many of these rituals have eroded. The sacred has been sanitized, privatized, or commercialized. Birth, marriage, death, these are no longer communal thresholds but logistical events. We've become spiritually displaced. And yet even now ritual can be reclaimed. In the morning walk taken without a phone. In the candle lit at dusk. In the journal opened at night. In the conscious pause to breathe, to notice, to bless. These acts do not need to be grand. They need only be consistent, intentional, alive. Meaning also survives through creative engagement. Art, writing, music, dance, these are not luxuries. They are languages of the soul. They give form to the ineffable, voice to what cannot be said any other way. They allow us to hold paradox, to speak grief without collapsing under it, to celebrate joy without needing to explain it. As Nietzsche wrote, we have art in order not to die of the truth. The truth, after all, can be unbearable when faced without beauty. But art makes it digestible, livable. Art is a form of metabolized suffering, a survival of soul. And what of love? Not romance in the superficial sense, but the fierce, vulnerable, embodied commitment to care. Love, real love, is one of the few experiences that pulls us out of the self and roots us in something larger. It says, you matter to me, and in doing so, it mirrors the soul's deepest hunger, to be seen, not for what we produce, but for who we are. To love and be loved is perhaps the most ancient meaning-making experience. It's why heartbreak breaks not just the heart, but the worldview. We love to make meaning. We lose love and meaning can collapse. But it's not just in grand love that meaning survives. It's also in the quiet acts of care. Checking in on a friend, preparing a meal, listening without agenda. These are sacred rituals disguised as ordinary moments. And perhaps the most profound tool for sustaining meaning is presence. We live in a time-disordered world, always pulled toward the future or haunted by the past. But the soul does not live in either. The soul is rooted in the now, in the taste of coffee, in the breath before speaking, in the silent recognition of another person's eyes. Jean-Paul Sartre, for all his despair, still recognized this, that we are condemned to be free, but in that freedom lies responsibility. To choose what our life will mean moment by moment, not in theory, in action, in presence. To live a meaningful life is not to escape the mundane, but to transform it, to treat the everyday as sacred, to find depth not only in death and crisis, but in washing the dishes, in holding a child, in sitting quietly with your own thoughts. And meaning, once woven into the daily, becomes resilient. It no longer depends on crisis or epiphany. It grows roots. It becomes the kind of truth you carry, not shout. A steady ember rather than a flash of light. This is what sustains the soul. Not peak experiences, but enduring practices. The slow burning of authenticity. The quiet decision to be awake. But still, a question lingers. If meaning is something we build, forge, and sustain, is it ever truly complete? Is there such a thing as final meaning? Or is the hunger itself what makes us fully alive? There is a hunger at the center of the human soul that never goes away. No matter how much meaning we find, create, or reclaim, there is always a deeper longing, a subtle ache that lingers beneath fulfillment. It is tempting to treat this ache as a flaw, something to be healed, something to fix. But what if it isn't? What if the ache itself is sacred? We often imagine meaning as a destination, a place we finally reach where the questions end and peace begins. But meaning, like love or truth, is not a static state. It is a relationship, a dynamic tension between what is and what might be. To hunger for meaning is not to be broken. It is to be alive. Arthur Schopenhauer, a man well acquainted with existential suffering, believed that the core of human nature was desire and endless striving that could never be fully satisfied. His worldview was bleak but not without insight. He understood that behind our pursuits of success, pleasure, even wisdom, was a deeper yearning that no external condition could resolve. But what Schopenhauer saw as tragic, others have seen as beautiful. The mystics speak of this ache as divine homesickness. Rumi called it the wound where the light enters you. Simone Weil called it the void that God must fill. And even secular thinkers like Ernest Becker understood that what we crave is not just to live, but to live significantly, to feel that our brief moment on this earth mattered in the face of death. We are finite beings with infinite longing. That is the paradox. But it is also the miracle. This unending hunger does not mean meaning is impossible. It means meaning is evolving. It means that the self you are today will not be the self you are a year from now, and so the meaning that once fit perfectly will one day feel tight, incomplete. Growth demands new questions. Awakening demands new confrontations. This is not failure. This is fidelity to the soul. Carl Jung saw this in his Patience. He realized that the goal of life was not happiness, but wholeness. And wholeness is not static, it is a lifelong unfolding. The privilege of a lifetime, he wrote, is to become who you truly are. But becoming is a process, a spiral. It is never finished. And so, rather than fearing the ache, we might learn to sit with it, to listen to it, to let it guide us, not into despair, but into depth. Because the ache is not just a cry of absence, it is a compass. It points us toward what matters. It asks us to live more honestly, to love more fiercely, to wonder more radically. To hunger is to care, and to care deeply is to live deeply. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." In this, he offers a strange kind of liberation. We are not prisoners of a meaningless universe. We are artists of significance. We may not choose the canvas, but we choose the brushstrokes. And those choices, not just once, but over and over, become our lives. To embrace the ache is not to wallow in it, but to honor it. To recognize that every time we feel it, it means we are still reaching, still becoming, still awake. In a world that constantly sells comfort, numbness, and distraction, to remain awake is an act of defiance and of grace. Perhaps then the soul's hunger for meaning is not meant to be satisfied, but honored. Not silenced, but answered again and again, in love, in ritual, in creativity, in courage. Meaning isn't a finish line. It is a practice, a posture, a way of being. And when we live this way, when we accept the ache, follow it, dance with it, we become something more than consumers, or thinkers, or even survivors. We become seekers. And in seeking, we become whole.